So Tuesday is a film all about grief. But in like that, but in like a little bit of like a weirdly fantastical and somewhat contemplative manner. I think like the best way that I described Tuesday in my review is that, like it's best to describe this film in terms of like what can happen in it. So like Roger Ebert would describe that My Neighbor Totoro is a film where little kids can go into the forest and they can curl up on the belly of a big furry creature and have a little nap. Tuesday is the type of film where the Grim Reaper can be a parrot. It can come into your room and it can just hang out with you to smoke weed and listen to rap. That's what can happen in this film, because that's literally what does happen. So like the whole premise of Tuesday is that Tuesday is this young woman played by Lola Pettigrew, who she is at death's door. She's sick, she's ill, she's spent her whole time in the house. Her mother, Zora, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, is struggling to pay the bills and just, is fairly distant from her daughter and just, it's just having a tough time in life. So death is ultimately coming for Tuesday, and death comes in the form of this parrot. We see this parrot come around as like the Grim Reaper and takes the souls. But then when the parrot arrives for Tuesday, Tuesday tries to charm the parrot with a joke, gives it a little bath, hangs out with it a bit and says, hey, can you hold off on taking my soul until like I can have some time with my mom? And the parrot kind of agrees, says like, okay, I'll give you a little bit of time, but you got to make this worth it. And it basically involves Tuesday forcing Sora to kind of like, be more open and talk about like the tougher stuff that she doesn't want to talk about, because like Zora really does want to push off like this idea that her daughter is going to die. She pushes it so far into the back of her mind that it takes on more of a literal form, that when she finds out that death is a parrot, there's no other way to say this. She eats it. She eats the Grim Reaper just so that she can spend more time with her daughter and have some time to to kind of like, do all the stuff that she feels that she couldn't do and say all the things that she felt she couldn't say. And there are hills and valleys with how Tuesday and Sora become more connected as a mother and daughter. Their relationship is, they have moments where they connect to each other, where they're, reading a magazine and having fun together and chatting. But then when Zora reveals, what has happened to the rest of the house and how she struggled for money, they have a fight about finances and why, Zora struggled for work. And, they get into like, a typical mother-daughter fight that you would expect them to have. But then, of course, like things get a little bit more fantastical, because, of course, once, Zora wipes out death, of course, then there is no death in the world. And if you've seen any like those, like stuff like Family Guy or stuff like that, where they have this concept where the Grim Reaper is put out of action, someone has to take over. So Zora ends up taking over with these new like Grim Reaper powers that include her being able to grow to like the size of a giant, which I found kind of funny because like when she does that, she's able to like carry around Tuesday on her back. So there's almost this kind of like lone wolf and cub dynamic to going around killing people, which would have been funny, I think, if the film leaned into that a little bit more. But I feel like there's like almost like a little bit of like a not quite flightiness, but like a casual nature to the fantastical elements here. Where it feels like the connection between the characters takes more precedence over the ideas that, a world where nobody can die. And I think like it gave me a little bit of that vibe from the George Miller film 3,000 Years of Longing, which is all about like a genie connecting with a woman and they form a romance, and the fantastical nature is treated with a little bit more of a little bit more casually than I think it would typically be for like the like a modern like low fantasy type deal. And I think that works for this film, and I think it allows like some of like the funnier moments, like when Death, who is voiced by with a deep voice by Arinz Keen, just like smokes weed and starts singing along with some rap songs that he knows. Like that's some fairly cute stuff. It's like kind of digging this. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus' performance is really good here. I think, she does a fairly good job of portraying this like stressed out mother who is both afraid of her daughter and saying goodbye to her daughter and feeling that anxiety and then coping with it more or less by confronting death and trying to like push it to the wayside for a while. I think that in the third act, when it becomes clear where it's going, it does get a little bit lost in the fantastical nature of it, that it's almost kind of one of those moments where I would, at least in that third act, I would almost kind of prefer that they lean into that a little bit more, because I think there might be a bit more to explore with that, with this character dynamic, where like, the mother and daughter learn a little bit more on this journey of watching other people die and getting to hear their stories. But I feel like that might balloon the film out to another hour, which I would be fine with. But I know, like, you got to keep your films a little bit more trim to get people into the theater, so I kind of understand that. It's mildly frustrating because I think there's enough interesting ideas here that are worth exploring, and I feel like it's just kind of like it's almost like a little bit too casual with it. But the performances, I think, by Pettigrew and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, they really cement this film and make you care about these characters. Not to mention, like, there's a fair amount of funny dialogue from Tuesday's nurse, played by Leah Harvey. I think there's some decent back and forth that Tuesday has with the nurse. That stuff's pretty neat. And I feel like a lot of like the potholes that this film could encounter are veered away from as narrowly as they can, even though it feels like the ideas kind of peter out in the third act and don't explore as much as they could have. That being said, as a contemplation on grief and finding a little bit of an absurd angle to go about with staging the Grim Reaper as a parrot, it's fairly meaningful, and I got engaged with it enough that even though the third act was a little bit weaker, I could forgive it, especially for the first act, which just kind of transfixed me from the start, especially for the slow reveal of Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Makes you appreciate her character all the more when she starts becoming when she becomes like a bigger figure into the frame. So yeah, so Tuesday, yeah, it's a pretty good contemplation on grief.